On this particular day, Downstate has hosted a nursing, research, and evidence-based practice conference. While many of our colleagues' evidence-based practice projects have been delayed or waylaid, we do have many of them displayed outside for those who have moved along, but we are continuing it with our tradition of a keynote address, and today we are having a special presentation from one of our leaders at the College of Nursing. That would be you, Dr. Rohan. And so I'm so proud to be the CNO at Downstate, and without further ado, let me turn the mic over to Mr. Amara Egbujour, okay, and who will introduce our speaker and get the program started. Happy Nurses Week to all. So that's what I'm going to say, okay?
That's great.
Where are you, Amara? There you are, sir. Okay? So comments are brief because we have an hour. And then you're going to get up following me and introduce. So do you want me to get up in the beginning, or are you going to get up in the beginning? Do you want to do two, or do you want me to just get up first? You get up first, and then you come on. Okay? And then introduce us, and then say what your comments. Okay? And then you thank everyone for coming. And person for our host presentation.
Yes, Dr. Annie. I'd also like to tell you our Miss here, welcome Miss Weston. She's the Senior Vice President of this great institution. And we are so glad to have her to be in our midst this morning. And I'd like to welcome her. And then the CEO is Mr. David Berger. But Miss Winston is right here, and we'd like to introduce her to you. So, Miss Winston is here saying hi, and thank you for coming. All right.
So let me just understand a minute here. So do I need to stand in front of the mic? When I'm standing in front of the mic, I see the camera is over there. Yeah. This is just a try. Let's start with that.
Okay.
This one, so that we can hear the Zoom. This one, so that people on YouTube can hear.
All right.
Before you stand up, we didn't hear you upstairs.
Okay.
And also, Dr. Rohan, we'd also like to welcome in our midst our CEO, Dr. Berger. Welcome, sir. Morning.
Also, we'd like now to continue.
This is
Yeah.
round. Practice round.
Yeah.
We have 2 more minutes to start.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, 2 minutes.
2 more minutes.
You will start. All right.
Okay.
And make sure you speak into the microphone, Amara and Erica, okay?
Yeah.
Is Dr. Rohan on? Okay, we're ready. We're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Joanne Ritter-Titel. I'm the chief nurse here at University Hospital of Brooklyn. And on behalf of all the nurses, nursing leadership, and our senior leadership team here at SUNY Downstate, I'd like to welcome you to our belated 2020 Nurses Week celebration. We are doing it both virtually via Zoom or Teams? Zoom, and we're here in the auditorium at the hospital. Sadly, the COVID pandemic got in the way of our Downstate's May celebration of the Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. But soon after Dr. Berger joined our team as UHB CEO in September, I was providing him an update on nursing. And I'm honored to say that during that discussion, Dr. Berger encouraged us to have our usual week of festivities, and so here we are. If you have not picked up your Nurses Week calendar, please do so, because there is a whole host of activities through the week, and that is designed to pay tribute to nurses, our nurses, and nursing. This week marks Florence Nightingale's 201st birthday. For the past 10 years, during Nurses Week, on Tuesdays, we traditionally host a nursing research and evidence-based practice conference. Today, we have some of our posters outside being displayed there from those practice projects. And while many of our colleagues' projects have been delayed or waylaid, we are continuing our tradition of a keynote address. And today, we have a special and uplifting presentation from one of our leaders at the College of Nursing. So I'm so proud to be the CNO here at Downstate. And without further ado, let me turn over the mic to Mr. Amara Egbujour, and who's going to introduce our speaker and get this program started. So happy Nurses Week to all, and thank you all to my senior leadership colleagues and all of my nursing colleagues throughout the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ritter. Thank you very much. And welcome back, everybody. Today, we are doing the annual Nurses Research Conference. And we also have here in our midst our senior leaders. We have Dr. David Berger, who is the CEO of this institution. We also have Ms. Patricia Winson, the Senior Vice President of this great institution. But we have to continue. I would like to introduce you the keynote speaker for this conference. We invited Dr. Annie Rohan to be the keynote speaker for this conference, and she accepted. So we are very glad to have her in our midst today. So I'm going to tell you about Dr. Annie Rohan, who is the keynote speaker. Dr. Annie Rohan is currently the Associate Dean for the Research and Sponsored Program at SUNY Downstate Health Science University, Brooklyn, New York. She earned an advanced practice certificate in neonatal nurse practitioner at Cornell Medical College, continuing education program for nurses. She also earned her master's degree in maternal child.
You fix it?
I'll say yeah.
All right. Dr. Rohan also earned her master's degree in maternal child in CNS from Columbia University and a post-certificate in pediatric nurse practitioner at Stony Brook University. In 2016, she was inducted as a fellow into the American Academy
Can I go down all the way to 7th floor because we get a key from downstairs and upstairs. So it should be the way that it used to be before. All right?
Never was that way as long as you were there.
You can hear me now? All right. So let's continue. Before this, I was introducing the keynote speaker, Dr. Annie Rohan. And I'll have to continue. Dr. Annie Rohan, she earned an advanced practice certificate in neonatal nurse practitioner at Cornell Medical College, continuing education program for nurses. She also earned master's degree in maternal child CNS from Columbia University and postmaster's certificate in pediatric nurse practitioner at Stony Brook University. In 2016, she was inducted as a fellow into the American Academy of Nurse Practitioners. While earning her PhD from Columbia University, she was selected to be the first neonatal cohort of Joanna's Nursing Scholars and recognized as the Advanced Practice Nurse of the Year by the March of Dimes. Dr. Rohan's academic career includes roles as the program director and the graduate department chair, informed by her 30 years clinical career and support for her national work for Commission of the Collegiate Nursing Education, American Nurses Association, and March of Dimes. To achieve the educational goal of more diverse health care workforce, Dr. Annie Rohan has secured over $5.5 million in federal grants, funds to support the education and educationally, financially, and environmentally disadvantaged students who seek to become healthcare providers in undeserved regions of New York. So a lot of people benefited from that. Dr. Rohan is the associate editor of MCN, the American Journal of Maternal Child Nursing, where she oversees East Toward Evidence-Based Practice column. She is also the associate editor for the pediatric content of I1, popular text book, Prenatal Nursing, 5th edition, Simpson and Crahan editor, LLW. She is both honored and inspired to join the Academy as a fellow of the Advanced Profound Work of Nursing. Dr. Rohan, she will be talking to us about an opportunity to guide the career in nursing. Please join us and join me to welcome Dr. Annie Rohan for this conference. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I am so grateful that you asked me to speak today. It is a little bit unusual to be doing this virtually, but I think that's the best way that we can reach the most people and keep it safe. So without further ado, I'm going to do what I practiced this morning and share my screen with you. Just let me know if this is working. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, doctor. It's working,
Great.
Dr. Annie.
And can everyone hear me? Wonderful. Okay, so without further ado, as long as you can hear me and you can see me, I'm going to start speaking. So as you heard, my speech today isn't really going to be about evidence-based practice or research. Some of those things are interesting to hear, but I really wanted to talk to you about a pathway to a career in nursing. So I call this an opportunist's guide to a career in nursing. And that's my name, Annie Rohan, and a whole bunch of letters, which really, at the end of the day, we all pay the same price to get on the subway. As you heard, I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Sponsored Programs down in the College of Nursing. You can just email me if you want to talk about anything. I'm also the Director of the Doctor of Nursing Practice Program, which we have up and running beginning January of this year, thanks to Dr. Lori Escalia's vision. Here's my story. Okay. like many of you, back when I was in high school, I had to decide really what I was going to do with my life. And I thought, oh, well, I always wanted to help people. I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up in Queens. My mother actually was a preschool teacher. She was born and raised in Brooklyn. And my father actually was an immigrant. So arrived to the country during World War II. And we lived a very modest life in Rosedale. So I started my journey saying I always wanted to help people, but I didn't always want to be a nurse. I think a lot of you have the same story. Maybe you always wanted to be a nurse, maybe you just wanted to help people. I didn't really know a lot of nurses. There wasn't really a nurse in my family. I was a pretty healthy kid, so I didn't actually run into many nurses, except maybe the school nurse, and I tried to avoid her, actually. So while I wasn't saying I always wanted to be a nurse, I was saying I always wanted to help people. And the only problem was I wanted to help people with their hair. I wanted to be a hairdresser. I had this inclination towards people, but nursing, maybe not so much. Like many teenagers, I thought my ability to craft hairstyles was fabulous. I tortured my friends with the beauty parlor game. And that actually was what I was going to do. I wasn't going to be any hairdresser, of course. I was going to own the shop. So I had this kind of desire to lead, maybe, but I was going to be the lead hairdresser in my own shop. And this was going to take some money. So I did things like the rest of you did. I babysat. I had a penny saver route. I actually had a lawnmower and was able to mow lawns, and that was a pretty good gig for a while. And then the good news was, when I was 16 years old, I don't know if any of you recognize this, but there was a great store named Fortunoff, the mecca of all shopping dreams. And I don't know if any of you are, I don't know what kind of audience I'm looking at right now, but I know some of you are old enough to have remembered Fortunoff and been there. So when I was 16, I became a cashier, and it was one of the best jobs I've ever had. There was tremendous camaraderie, and every day that I worked there, I learned something new. Not just something new, but things that were broadly applicable in life. And that theme comes back in nursing. You learn things every day that are broadly applicable in life. Of course, at Fortunoff's, those things were about, we didn't have computerized cash registers back then. So I learned how to count change back to customers, the fine art that is now lost. I learned about credit cards, about traveler's checks. I learned about purchase orders, how to count out a cash drawer. It was a great job. I worked there while I was in high school, on weekends, over the summers. I did well. I moved up the ranks. I worked in the gift wrap department. I became a special orders cashier. I think I realized I had a general enthusiasm for learning. People say no matter what you do it well. I'll add to that. No matter how much you learn it well. So I arrived to 11th grade. I was a learning enthusiast. I had a great job in Fortunoff's, but people started talking about college. So I talked to my parents a little bit about college. Now, my parents didn't go to college. My father, like I said, barely got through high school. He didn't speak English when he arrived here. And my mother, she was a preschool teacher who graduated from high school, but didn't go didn't really have an opportunity to go far beyond that. So I talked to my father about college, and he calculated something called a break-even point. This was, here, I'll show you a little bit what he meant. The break-even point was the time it would take in years when the cost of an education was, and my loss of income during that time, given my great job at Fortunoff's, was going to be exceeded by the subsequent return in salary after graduation. And what he figured out was that it was going to take 12 and a half years for me to break even if I left my job at Fortunoff's and go to college. So that originally didn't look like it was going to happen, but this wonderful man had a soft spot for me, his oldest daughter, and was willing to compromise. So he established that he would help me go through college as long as I picked a practical major. So we agreed that I would go to school if I would become either a nurse or a teacher. Okay, fair enough. So my friend Laura was going to be a nurse because her mother was a nurse, and that sounded pretty good, so I did the same. And that's how I became a nurse. So I filled out the SUNY Binghamton, Buffalo, Albany, Stony Brook joint application at the time. It was all the SUNYs rolled into one. And a few months later, I received my letter in the mail. I had been accepted to SUNY Binghamton's School of Nursing, right now called the Decker School of Nursing. Some of you may have gone there. Up in middle of New York, cold Binghamton. But despite the location, I adored going to school. And it didn't take very long before I also fell in love with nursing. I moved up to Binghamton. I actually got a job up there within a couple months of moving there as a nurse's aide in downtown Binghamton. And I discovered that nursing represents one of the most diversified, experiential, engaging, and human of all professions. I came to believe that those who were well educated in nursing did pretty well in life, and those who developed a greater appreciation for life because of nursing actually did really well in nursing. So speaking of things that one can appreciate, I thought I would share a few things with you. So this is my student nursing uniform. Yes, complete with a cap and a pinafore. For those of you who remember back, the schools identified you by the cap. It was a big deal. We had a whole class on how to keep that cap looking smart. But besides getting a nursing uniform and a cap, a lot of other great things happened to me at Binghamton. For starters, I also discovered the road trip, which for those of you who went away to college, meant that you worked really hard to stay in school during the week, and you worked really hard to get off campus on the weekend. So now, up in Binghamton, now that I was up in Binghamton, I wanted to get out of Binghamton, but I didn't have a whole lot of money being just a nurse's aide, so I had to find a more affordable way to travel. So while I was up there, being an opportunist, remember the name of this lecture is An Opportunist's Guide to a Career in Nursing, I discovered the New York State Student Nurses Association. And I quickly ran for office. And the reason I ran for office is because the officers in New York State would get a weekend travel allowance, that is paid travel, to go different places in the state for their meetings. So a legitimate excuse for a weekend road trip nearly every weekend. Oh, and that is actually me. That is me on my last day of clinical as a kind of a camaraderie routine up there. The nurses who you worked with used to rip your nursing uniform on the last day of class. I don't know if any of you remember that, but you can see my nursing uniform is a little bit charred up over there. But yeah, so onward. So a lot of great things happened to me in Binghamton, but here was probably the best thing of all. I had a med-surg rotation up there in a little hospital called Our Lady of Lourdes. And I remember it like yesterday. There was a woman who I took care of week after week. She was my assignment to do bed bath and routine care and change the sheets. And of course, back then, some people stayed in the hospital the way you stayed in a nursing home. And her name was Essie. And she said to me every week, some version of the same thing. They can take away your car and they can take away your money, but they can never take away your education. Profound, or maybe it was just soft. Maybe it was coming from a woman who had very limited time left on earth, but what she said to me made a huge impact, and I remembered it. I remember it all the time. They can take away your car, they can take away your money, but no one can take away your education. So with that, I finished my bachelor's degree in nursing. A lot of great stories. Long and short of it is that I graduated in 4 years. I had a little money in my pocket from being a nurse's aide. I knew a lot about great opportunities in New York from being involved in the New York State Student Nurses Association. And I studied like a dog to make sure that I passed my NCLEX exam, which I did. And then I had to choose a job, and of all the places that existed in New York, I chose New York Hospital Coronary Medical Center, which is now part of the Presbyterian Hospital System, but back then this is what it looked like. And they had a great little gig going on over there. They actually, it was in the middle of a nursing shortage. When hasn't there been a nursing shortage? But back then, they actually had a tower next to the hospital where they housed nurses. So for those of us who didn't know how to live completely on our own, we moved into the nursing housing. We took a job at the hospital. They took your rent right out of your paycheck, and then they had you for as much overtime as they needed you for. But it was a great, great first experience. And just like my job at Fortunoff's, every day I learned something new. I learned something practical. Back then, and maybe still now, there's this directive in nursing. People start to encourage you to start out on a med-surg floor. In fact, right up until the time I started my career, rarely did a nurse get hired for anything but a med-surg floor. But with the recognition of the nursing shortage, I discovered that there were some specialty units that were hiring directly right out of school, certain ICUs. So I took up that opportunity, and what I did was took a job, my first job, in the newborn intensive care unit, where I worked with some of the sickest babies in Manhattan. Let's see if I can show you some pictures of that. So here's me back in the 1980s when I had lots of curly hair. This was a baby. There were lots of babies back then who stayed for months in the hospital. The patient was very difficult for a lot of their parents. So the nurses who worked there nearly adopted these children as their own, cared for them, clothed them, combed their hair, cut their little nails, even more than, as all nurses, we always take very good care of our patients. Here's another funny one. I think more funny, these are triplets. Back then you didn't need any consent to take pictures of patients. And as you can see, we put our pocketbooks right down on the counters. I mean, the whole thing is a big old mess, but we were very happy. We worked together, and we've since evolved a little bit in terms of our policies, particularly our infection control policies. But I was a happy camper, and I loved that job. But then, I was there for about a year, and here's the opportunist in me. They were looking for people to do advanced practice nursing. So a little history. Nurse practitioners, originally coined nurse clinicians, originated back in maybe the late 70s, mid 80s. And the majority of those advanced practice nurses were not being educated in universities, but rather were educated in hospital certificate programs. There was really no formal prescriptive privileges back then. Master's preparation was really not a reality for those advanced practice nurses. They were nurse clinicians. And Cornell actually was one of the first big sites to utilize advanced practice nurses in the newborn intensive care unit. A wonderful woman named Linda Belated, who still was speaking at national conferences up until recently, was one of those early nurse practitioners, and she published extensively about the role. It was her vision that, and probably her vision that was laid much of the groundwork for the further development of the nurse practitioner role. So a year into my position as an RN, I was approached by the hospital. If you were able to, I was pretty good at sticking IVs in people. So if you were technically good, I think that's what they were looking for back then. They asked you to join their nurse practitioner certificate program. And in 1988, I went to Cornell Medical College to a continuing education program for nurses. And I was pulled out of the nursing school, put into school And as long as I committed to 3 years after graduation as a nurse practitioner at Cornell, they would cover my fees completely. So the opportunist in me says, of course, I'll do that. 3 years in Manhattan, you pay for my education, I'm good. And that's what I did. In 1988, I graduated as a nurse practitioner from the Cornell program. So the next thing that happened, though, was just fabulous. I got to do things that nobody gets to do. I transported babies in ambulances, in helicopters. I put in chest tubes, central lines. I got to learn to intubate, how to adjust respirators. There were so many babies there, though, that we also, that put marks on our heart. This is a picture of footprints and hands that I carried around probably for 20 years in my wallet. It was a baby who was found, whose poor mother actually passed away. And the baby passed away as well, and I didn't want anyone to forget who this baby was and how loved, you know, his mother probably, how much love his mother probably had for him. So I committed to carrying around, like many nurses, carrying around footprints for many, many years. But the coolest thing that I noticed, and I appreciated even more than all the fancy procedures, you got to walk into people's lives and be privileged with their most sensitive and personal information. It was a huge privilege then, it still is now, and I don't know, you know, every day I think you grow to appreciate and respect that privilege a little bit more. Nothing I want to comment on. This is the Gallup survey. In 2020, probably for the 21st year in a row, nurses were voted the most trusted profession in America. The Gallup survey analyzes professional standards. 84% of Americans, maybe now it's up to 90%, believe that nurses' honesty and ethical standards are either high or very high. The fundamental principles of nursing, compassion, respect for the individual, they are what inspire me and they inspire you, I am sure, every day to promote health, prevent illness, alleviate suffering, and your public believes in you. They respect you. They think you have the highest ethical standards, and you do. Actually, since its induction, and I think, and since they introduced the Gallup poll in 1999, I think nurses, it's my understanding, they received the highest ranking every year, except in 2001 when firefighters topped the list. But you are, you know, for your choices, America respects you. Okay, so let's get back to the things that nursing school didn't tell you would happen. Because I realized around this time, maybe I was 5 years into nursing, that I was being transformed. Being a nurse was actually becoming part of my fabric. I was beginning to define myself in a way that was consistent with the profession. So what happened in nursing school that they didn't say would happen? Well, for starters, you are now able to discuss anything while you eat. In the nursing lounge over lunch, you were going to be able to hear about drainage, vomit, lice, mucus. It will not bother you. You will be able to describe the color, quantity, and consistency of this suction canister and then go right back to your sandwich. And you're also going to have to hear about Uncle Sam's prostate exam, Cousin Bertha's childbirth experience, and how many times the lab tech had to stick your best friend until the blood was drawn. And a variety of other offenses and mutilations will be upon your ears because people trust nurses. People trust you. What else did they not tell you would happen in nursing school? Well, you have just been indoctrinated into the role more vital than the hospital RN or the community RN. You are going to become the primary health resource for all of your friends and family. You have just become that nurse friend. Or for those lucky enough, you've become the family nurse. Nobody told you that was going to happen in nursing school, but it always does. Next, well, when coming into contact with a person, you tend to always do a quick scan of the arms to see if there are any good IV sites. That's right. You will even know the status of the mailman's veins at this point. And, of course, one other thing they didn't tell you in nursing school is you can still enjoy your friends and family as long as everyone washes their hands. Okay, so now that we've covered that list, let's move on. What was the opportunist going to do next? Well, a master's degree, right? Well, this is around, remember I mentioned that nurse practitioners didn't really need a master's degree, but this was now in the early 1990s, and it was becoming more common that nurse practitioners, nurse clinicians were being trained at the university setting. So if I didn't get a university degree, I was going to be left behind. So I saw that writing on the wall, and I quickly was looking for the opportunity. And sure enough, there was one. Because New York Hospital, like many hospitals back then, had a little caveat to encourage their nurses to go back to school. They had tuition reimbursement. And here was the deal back then. If you enrolled in a university-level education program that would enhance your role as a nurse, the hospital would pick up the tab. No, crazy, right? They don't do that now, but they did it back then. And I didn't want to let a good opportunity go by. So I actually remember going down to the nursing office to check on this. It seemed like there was a hitch. But no, if you enroll in a program, and it's a nursing program, and you can substantiate how it's going to make you a stronger nursing professional, they would cover the bill. So what does a nurse opportunist do? I went out and picked the most expensive school I could find in Manhattan and applied. And that's what I did. So I went to Columbia University School of Nursing. They offered full tuition support. It was a nursing program. I figured out which one I could get into. It was the master's it was a master's program as a clinical nurse specialist. I was already a nurse practitioner, so I didn't need to do that again. And of course, I was going to do that. It was an opportunity. Also around this time, there were some programs that were recognizing that nurse practitioners who had, or nurse clinicians, clinical nurse specialists who maybe had a master's degree may want to go back and become nurse practitioners. So Stony Brook University had a very cool, innovative idea, and that was to offer a certificate as a nurse practitioner to nurses who already had master's degrees. And actually, the Dean of our College of Nursing here at Downstate was one of the innovative people who started that program at Stony Brook. And I knew her back then, and she said, hey, let's try this out. So indeed, as a nurse practitioner with a neonatal specialty and now a master's degree from Columbia, I went back to Stony Brook, and in just 4 short semesters, was able to become dually certified as a nurse, as a second nurse practitioner. I got a nurse practitioner certification, a certificate, and then certification in pediatrics, in general care pediatrics. So I was now a dually certified nurse practitioner. Very innovative program. If you're a master's degree in one area, you can go ahead and be interested in another one. So that was now 1991. So I'm now about 7 years out of nursing school, 8 years out of nursing school. I have I'm school certified. I'm working a lot, and I am starting to reflect on my life and my career so far. So I take a little pause here to tell you what I thought that I had brilliantly discovered at the time. I'm thinking it's more like 8 or 10 years into nursing, the mid-1990s, and some nursing friends and I were asked to speak to a group of nurses at the hospital about our observations. So we wrote down these observations back then, so mid-1990s, and I actually have the list, and I share them because it reminds me that the landscape of nursing doesn't change much at all over time. Okay, so mid-1990s, here are the great truths of nursing from myself and my nurse colleagues at the time. For one, great mistruth. You need to start your career on a med-surg floor. Well, we sort of covered this. to this day, I have not been formally trained in adult Foley catheter care or hip replacement ambulation. But I will tell you this, I get called upon with some frequency to help my friends with their mothers and their fathers as they come home from the hospital with hip replacement surgery or with a Foley catheter, and it is totally smooth. You don't need that formal med-surg training. You're a nurse, you can figure this stuff out. Because nursing teaches you much more than tasks. It teaches you how to deal with issues. Same approach every time. Assess the situation, develop a relationship with the patient, use some thoughtful, logical intervention. A port is a port. So despite that, it's been 30 plus years since I've been to nursing school, and I've had no experience with a Foley catheter. Helping out with one is really not an issue, and nobody seems to mind to ask their nurse friend about that more than any other person, more than anybody else. So here's another great mistruth. Hospital advertising is the gold standard for recruiting patients. The hospitals had these big budgets, lots of money spent in making sure that patients came to their hospital, became a big business back, starting even before the 1990s, but really, obviously now, you probably don't know much differently. Healthcare systems and recruiting patients was a big deal, but we identified this back then as a great mistruth. We think, and always do, and I think it's still true, that the truth is that when a person needs health or illness care, they don't really care about advertising. They go to their nurse friends and ask them where to go. You are probably humbled with that responsibility to direct people to appropriate medical care, to help your friends dozens and dozens of times over every year, whether you realize it or not. You're giving out information that is so valuable and important and worthy. You'll learn the importance, or have learned the importance of being an advocate. You have learned to be in that difficult position of when not to offer advice, when it's not to be solicited. What else did, so this was a big one back in the 1990s. I think it's still an important one then. So what other big mistruths did we have? Okay, well, when a person, a big mistruth is the team is up to date on the patient's plan of care. Yeah, that was back then. That was a big deal back then. I was a night shift nurse, so I always was surprised at how much people knew what was going on at 8 o'clock in the morning. The big truth for hospital nurses is that less than 25% of the time an inpatient spends in a hospital occurs from Monday to Friday during the hours of 9 to 5. So being part of a team is very important, but boy, oh boy, nothing has changed there. It is so important that we remember that 75% of the time an inpatient spends in the hospital is not under the 9 to 5 watch of the team. Continue to be those eyes and ears, continue to be proud of that role. Another mistruth that we learned is that, one thing that they used to say, that if it doesn't make sense, just do it anyway, because there's probably some public health law, some Joint Commission standard, some HIPAA rule, or some policy that needs to be followed. I think this is a great mistruth. Quite frankly, if it doesn't make sense, it probably doesn't make sense. And you need to ask about that. Don't assume that everything has, some logical that you don't understand. You're smart, you get it, ask questions. Don't accept that you have to do something that doesn't make sense. And finally, the infamous mistruth, hospital nurses prevent residents from blanking the patients. That's why they're hired. We've all been hospital nurses. I love my interprofessional colleagues, but the truth of the matter is, without nurses, I don't think physician education would take place astride a human population. So God bless you all for doing the work you do every day to smooth out the education of our interprofessional colleagues and make it doable. there are dozens and dozens of times you're going to get called upon to remind residents, other professionals to wash their hands, to wear their gloves, to tie their mask. You're going to prioritize emergencies so that their expertise is best utilized, but you're also going to teach them how to do so many of the things that they don't learn in their programs, and how to do it with grace, and how to do it with giving their patient dignity. Don't ever underestimate how important that role is. You may not get credit for it, but it is very important. All right, so enough of our great truths and mistruths. I was back to being an opportunist. This is the mid-1990s. I actually stayed in my role as a nurse practitioner for probably the next 15 years. I had kids. I enjoyed, raising them. I sort of had my cake and ate it too. I worked nights, weekends and holidays, so I could be home with my kids during the day. But somewhere about 15 years later, I started to get that bug. I remembered Essie. I remembered about somebody never taking away my education if I had more of it, and I started to want to do more of that. So the DNP started to become an interesting degree. That was doctor of nursing practice. It was the highest level of clinical. It was the highest degree that you could get as a clinical practitioner, but there was also a research degree called a PhD. And I know people make it seem like you have this career path and you spent enormous amounts of time considering what you should be doing if you go on to an advanced degree, DNP, PhD. We've all kind of had it in our blood for years and years, but I will tell you, truth, that was not the case with me. I was a clinician. Probably the logical thing for me would have been a DNP, but quite frankly, I was also an opportunist. I had kids. I had to figure out where I could go to school and keep my job, and which program was closer and which one cost the right amount of money. So if I wanted a terminal degree, I was not going to be able to spend my time considering, the minutia of it. I just needed to go, get on that pavement and figure out what was out there for me. And it turns out that a DNP degree was right down the block for me at Stony Brook University at the time, and I thought, oh, that's great, I'm going to apply. And lo and behold, in the 11th hour, the program actually didn't open on time, and I was ready to go to school, so DNP it wasn't. I had to go ahead and apply to a different school if I was going to go back to school. And what did I do? I went back to my alma mater, Columbia, where they were offering tuition and stipends if people would become nurse faculty. So here I was a clinician for 20 years, but here's an opportunity. I could go back for a PhD education, fully funded. All I needed to do was, when I graduate, switch careers instead of continuing my work as a nurse practitioner, which was very worthy and which I loved. I had to switch over to faculty work. Well, there was a faculty shortage, sounded like a reasonably good thing to do, of course. So with funding from the Jonas Center for Nursing Excellence, I returned to Columbia University, and in 2013, I graduated with a PhD. And again, like Essie said, no one will ever be able to take that away from me, or any degree that you ever get. So let me go back to my original talk that I had with my dad, the 12.5 years, the break-even point. Well, it's been about 30 years now. I think I did well. I've been in nursing for now 32 years. I have loved every day, every adventure. I am proud of what I do, and I think that it is more worthy a profession now than it was even when I started. I just want to end this with some of the best advice that I've kind of put together over the years. Number one, enjoy people. Notice that I don't say like people, because for sure you will not like everyone you work with, and certainly you will not like all of your patients. But there is no reason why you can't enjoy them. There's always something about a person that can make you smile, even if it means ordering them a plate of low-salt hospital food. Okay, more best advice. Leave work each day knowing that you are invaluable. There should not be a day when you do not end your work feeling like you're a valuable professional. I can assure you, some days it won't be easy. Nurses are an easy target for blame in a complicated healthcare and illness system, especially when you're one of the best ones out there, because they are everywhere. They are like moms. But leave each day knowing you are valued. And the more conscientious you are and the more you do, the harder that may be on some days. You will feel put off by your administrators. Some days it may be your colleagues. Some days you will feel put off by the providers with whom you've always collaborated, and some days it may even be your patients. But never, ever walk away thinking your piece didn't matter. Even on the worst days, you most certainly had an impact. Best advice number 3. No matter the circumstances, be grateful when you are not the one on the receiving end of services. You are going to and have seen hundreds of patients who maybe abused their bodies, failed to practice preventative health care, and otherwise landed in your care for what seems to be a lot of maybe self-initiated poor choices. But do not judge. Especially when you're tired and when you feel beaten up yourself, find the strength to teach, to listen, and then bring your organized thoughts back to the larger healthcare system to make it better. And when it's nearly impossible to be good to every person every day, at the very least, be grateful you are not on the receiving end of the services. Be proud that you're able to be the provider of care and not the recipient. Be satisfied just knowing that you have the strength and the character to be the one standing at the bedside. Number 4, best advice, be good to each other. I'm not going to say much about this. Nursing workforce relationships is an entire lecture in itself. We must be good to each other. Suffice to say, in our healthcare environment, if we do not work together, if we do not hang together, we will most certainly hang separately. Do not tolerate systems that unnecessarily pit nurses against nurses. Do not succumb to day staff, night staff alliances. Don't play the game of negatively generalizing one unit's care over another unit's care, or the practices of referring to one institution in a certain way. If there is one viable approach that could strengthen and doubly empower our profession in this next generation, it is to support each other, truly support each other at all levels, and starting at the side. We are the largest profession in the nation. Rise above the institutional stereotyping. Do not tolerate marginalization, and do not accept systems that support unnecessary restriction. And one last thing, one last piece of advice. Embrace your education. Never lose your curiosity. Never stop inquiring. Remember Essie at Our Ladies of Lourdes Hospital in Binghamton. They can take your car, they can take your money, but nobody can take away your education. Knowledge is power. And if you're surrounded by opportunities to learn, learn. Stick with your education, even if it's not formal. Informal education is good too. Even in a down economy, it remains an unprecedented value. So those are my 5 pieces of advice, and that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. And thank you, everyone, and my warmest and most heartfelt congratulations for choosing the finest profession. That's all.
Well, I must say, thank you very much, Dr. Rohan, for that beautiful presentation. And I must congratulate our audience for attending, our Chief Nursing Officer, Dr. Richard Titel, our Vice President, Dr. Patricia Winston, our Head of our Nursing Education Department, Dr. Jacqueline Witter. And thank you for the rest of the audience for attending. And now I invite you to visit our display of our posters outside of the auditorium. Thanks again. And thank you for our virtual audience.
Thank you, Dr. Annie. I wonder if anybody has any questions for Dr. Annie? All right, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.